You're sitting there with your laptop. You're losing the games. Your friends are mad at you. Slowly but surely, you can hear your laptop whispering, "Please, buddy, I can't go on like this." Desperately, you look for a PC build on YouTube and find the perfect one. But then you look at your piggy bank and it's all sad. Welcome to the 300 New Zealand dollar PC build. Let's start off by showing you how I managed to pull this off. So to do this, you're going to need to keep TradeMe open and stalk the parts you want. What I did was I started by purchasing a HP 8200 desktop small form factor for about $50. It came with decent parts. DDR3 4GB RAM, an i5 2400, and a 500GB hard drive. It's pretty solid for $50. I also made sure that it had a PCIe 16X slot, which I could take advantage of. It was also important to check out that the PC is actually capable of using an external graphics card through its 16X slot. I found out it was online. I headed over in the car to pick it up and it actually looked pretty good. Handed over the money and headed back home. Lockdown came about 1 week later and my PC also just happened to die. I wasn't planning on using this PC just yet, but I'm glad I bought it. So I headed back to TradeMe and I purchased a kit of DDR3 16GB RAM for about $30. Which isn't too bad considering that DDR3 secondhand is quite expensive in New Zealand. I also found out that I wasn't able to use my SSD from my normal PC because of a software issue. So I managed to pick up a 120GB Lite-On SSD secondhand off TradeMe for about $20. This was an absolute steal, and I could not believe how cheap it was. It wasn't the fastest, but it certainly did the job. Next, I purchased a 16X graphics card riser in order to use my RX 580 on my computer. This was about $5 total, so not too bad at all. However, when I received my 16X riser, my RX 580 actually had stability issues. It kept turning the PC on and off when it was used for a few minutes. I think it was drawing too much power from the motherboard 16X slot combined with an external power supply being jumped to its 8-pin connector. So I headed back to TradeMe. Again, I was looking for a graphics card. This was super hard to find, and I wanted to purchase one below $100 in order to keep on the budget. Luckily, in an auction, I managed to pick up a low-powered GTX 1050 2GB model. I personally would not recommend this card, but I think it did work out quite well in the end, because I didn't need an external power supply cable unlike my RX 580. The next step was hard, the waiting game. All of these components had to be shipped to me because of level 4 lockdown in New Zealand, the highest level of lockdown. A few days later, I started receiving all the components one by one. First the SSD, then the RAM, next the graphics card riser, then lastly the GTX 1050. I was so hyped to install everything, so I installed Windows on the SSD and got all the drivers working. So luckily the PC also came with a Windows 7 license, so I had nothing to worry about. Next came the RAM. It was a bit annoying to install as one of the heatsinks on the CPU cooler next to the RAM slots was super close and sometimes causing a short on the motherboard between the RAM and the heatsink, causing the RAM not to show up. So I solved this with a piece of paper, which is definitely not recommended at all, and it's super dangerous because if anything sparks, that piece of paper is gonna go on fire. But luckily, 16 gigs of RAM did show up in the BIOS. Next was the graphics card riser, a super easy install, just plug and play. Lastly, I installed the GTX 1050, which slotted in perfectly into the riser. I'd made a super cool stand for it as well, to make sure it could stand upright outside the case. Finally, the masterpiece was complete. But you might be wondering, what about that CPU? What I found out through using the PC through a few weeks of use was that the CPU was a bit weak for my work and sometimes would lag out the system. The i5 2400 is a good CPU, but I think in 2020 you need to have at least 4 cores, 8 threads as a minimum. Back to TradeMe I went. I reluctantly purchased an i7 2600, which you can see in the unboxing video. I'd purchased this bad boy for a solid $100. I also needed some good thermal paste, which is another $15 from Computer Lounge for Noctua NTH1. This time, the CPU and thermal paste only took 2 days to arrive. Now, finally the monster was complete. I really felt the difference going from the i5 2400 to the i7 2600. Even though it was $100 extra, I really felt the difference. No more lag, and it felt like I was on my original desktop with the Ryzen 5 1500X. I reached the end of the build, and the build cost me a total of $325. A super achievable goal for anyone even scraping money together when they're young. This goes to show that even with secondhand parts, you can build a decent gaming PC on the cheap. I used this PC for about 4 months and it was really pleasant. The only annoying thing was that the fan didn't cool down the CPU fast enough. So sometimes when I had my heater, mind you I wasn't in Auckland and it was below -2 degrees at night sometimes, my PC would turn off because of how hot my room was as I had my heater on, and yeah, it was pretty cold. But other than that, I had an awesome time playing Valorant, League of Legends, and other few games, nothing too intensive. Now this PC isn't a performance monster and won't play games at high 1080p 60fps. Instead, it played games well at far more than 60fps on 900p high settings. It isn't the best, but for the money, I think it's quite good, especially if you're on a really tight budget. If I get a chance, I'll benchmark some games and put them here, but if I don't, you'll see them in a later video. If you can't afford a new gaming PC, and you have a budget of below $300, I would consider getting a PC like this, or just saving up for something a little bit better. So, if you're not doing anything intensive, you don't mind what your graphics settings look like, you're not fussed about having 1080p, and you're just looking to have a good time with your friends, then this PC build is for you. It really does work like I've shown you, but just make sure that all of your parts you wish to buy are reasonably priced and will actually be compatible in that computer you wish to build. So that about sums up the $300 gaming PC for New Zealand. Make sure you subscribe and check out ystech.org for the latest in unboxing and technology content. Thank you guys for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!